Still in Griffin, still chapter 13 on privacy. We're in the third video. That's why there's a little C. So far okay. So what's the result of that previous digression in the previous video of the little bit on U.S. jurisprudence? Remember, it's the notion of privacy shifting, the term shifting. And Wittgenstein tells us to beware that we're not bewitched by language when a term is moving all over the place and we think it means the same thing all the time. It doesn't. This is Griffin's point. He says so now he looks at a couple of cases, but his overall picture is that there has been a move from informational privacy. Then sometimes it's a narrower concept of a personal space, home is castle, and the values that are associated with, my personal space, as in a very physical space, and it's kind of an unobservable one. No one gets to even look in unless I say it's okay. You can only come in if you're invited, kind of space. And then to a much broader notion of privacy, in the privacy of liberty, which is different and is grounded in a value of liberty. So different values are at play here in these different concepts of privacy. So don't be bewitched by using the same term privacy. That's Griffin's main point here. Now, let's think a little bit more, Griffin says, about principles of liberty, right? We talked a little bit previously about how we're now embracing a principle of liberty that's kind of like Mill's, and the liberty of being, the freedom to be left alone. Don't bug me while I'm doing my thing, even if it's in the public space, as long as I'm not harming anyone. And then, of course, the devil pops out and says, yeah, but what do you mean by harm? Well, that's another problem. But for the most part, it's that these principles of liberty, however they're phrased, whether in the Millsian form or a different one, what they do, principles of liberty, they really create areas, they carve out areas of human life, and they're not terribly specific about the areas, where the areas are located, right? And it's good to think of them because the areas that are carved out by liberty principles are independent of observation and things like that. They can be, maybe not, whatever. So that breaks this notion of privacy as this personal thing, which we tend to think is something as in concealment. No, it's not that. So the notion of any principle of liberty creates an area X such that X is off limits to authorities, right? It's not an area of public interest. So if you're governed by a principle of liberty, it doesn't say very much. It just says that you have the right to be left alone while you're doing while you're doing your thing, whatever it happens to be, as long as it's not harming. So it's just not an area of public interest. But it doesn't say much more than that. It's actually kind of limited. It's just, again, being left alone. And of course, that is largely a negative, right? Is people just get out of my way and let me do my thing, and don't get in. And get out of my way is a little bit like people have to make room for you, but people are not to get in your way while you're doing that, to deliberately. You don't get to just boss everybody around. But if you're doing your thing, people are not supposed to get in and block you. That's really what the whole idea of the idea of this area X that's formed by a principle of liberty. So X is private, yes, but it's a liberty-generated privacy. Now, liberty, okay, now I've been saying this, it's independent of observation. So liberty privacies are rather odd, as long as you stick to this notion of privacy being kind of a concealment or whatever, because they can exist in public spaces, right? A liberty-generated space, a liberty privacy space, it's no necessary relation to observation. Observed or not, it doesn't really matter. So there are actions that are publicly observable, but they will be protected by the liberty of privacy. Griffin gives an example of two gay people kiss in public, right? Big deal, no harm there. They're doing their thing. It's part of their, like, to use Griffin's language, it would be part of their conceptualization of life. And we saw that picking love in your life would fall under in here in terms of your normative agency. That part of preservation of normative agency would be the ability to pick love in one's life. Okay, so that fits in. You protect that. It protects normative agency. It can be also protected by a principle of liberty in general, because it's nobody's business, right? It's not harming anyone, and nobody has the right to block or get in the way. So it's a public, so what you've got is like a public kiss. Okay, and that's it. But think about that in the sense of those in engaging in the public kiss would have a right not to be interfered with. So you can't go in. You're not to interfere in any way. But think of it from the other side. So if two people are kissing in public and you look at it, right? And I'm not talking about being weird and staring. I'm just like, if you look over and okay, you did observe this. So in that sense, is it a violation of their rights that you saw what they were doing? No. Again, you can't go in and stop it. But if you happen to see it or whatever, no. Now it would get more complicated if you say, yeah, can you take a picture and like in some people, they make money off snapping pictures of people. So that's a financial issue that gets into all other kinds of privacy that I'm not going to get into here. But the actual act is not harming anyone. But if you happen to see it, that's not a violation of anybody's human rights either, because you're not really interfering. But you could make the argument that if you start taking pictures, that's really now a kind of interference. But just simply having a look and whatever and walking on your way, that's not violating their liberty rights, right? You haven't violated any rights. But the very same action, right? Two people kissing, and you put it in their own home, and then you come along and you peep in the window and you look. That's different, right? Now you are violating something. So the point of all this is that the sense of privacy in the liberty-based private kiss is different from the sense of privacy in the privacy of the bedroom or like the home. So I'm just going to put a little H for that, and then LB for liberty-based. So in other words, the privacy of the liberty-based is rooted in a principle of liberty, right? It's connected to a value of liberty, and the privacy of the home is linked to other values. So you've got two very distinct senses of values here. So it's an error just to assume that all senses of privacy are the same. No, they're quite different, and they're rooted in different values. So now, what have we got? Well, we've got clearly three senses of privacy. Now, the question after this discussion, right, of jurisprudence, this all falls out of Griffin's analysis of the jurisprudence, the movement of it from here to here to here. What happens now? Stay tuned.